Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the International Center Goa. This is the official me. We are here to discuss drug regulation in India, policies and prescriptions. We have with us Dinesh Thakur. I think he needs no introduction, please. Other than what he has done in the past, I think he's stuck to his guns and said, look, come whatever may, this is what I'm going to continue doing. And yesterday I was asking him, nobody really cares, but thank God Vivek Debroy had something to say in a recent column that he wrote for, I don't remember which newspaper, which I think you posted on Twitter. So I said, look, at least that's a start. I don't think he was particularly optimistic about what happens next, but I think that's a start. So somewhere we can hope that some people start to care about drug regulation, because if I ask you, how many of you pop pills? I'm sure everybody does. I don't need to ask you, raise your hands or anything like that. We all pop pills. It's a question of how many per day or how many per week or how many per month. The problem is it's pretty much like, clean drinking water, right? I mean, you do not have access to clean drinking water, and you have serious illnesses. You have impact on infant mortality, life expectancy in general. When you think of pills, because you pop them so often, so many people of all ages, even younger people these days, and if you do not know what exactly it is that you are popping, we are talking about, of course, big pharma. We are talking about huge profits. The response I got to when I invited someone for this program a few days ago was that, what's the good of doing something like having a discussion on drug regulation? What's the point? And this is somebody from the medical profession, a doctor. And he said, what's the point? Because nothing is going to change. He seriously said that. He said that everybody is in their pockets, right? The pharmaceutical companies, politicians, bureaucrats, medical practitioners of all kinds, everybody is in it. There is so much money involved. Now, so why are we talking about it? Because I think this is the place where we do exactly that, even if it is to a limited number of people. Perhaps some of you will, do something more than just listen, maybe even write an op-ed or two for the local newspapers, post it on Twitter, on social media in general. Even that is something, because when you read, the first time I came to know was through newspaper reports and all that, but this is a book you have to read. It's an absolute thriller, and in a terrible way, right? It's about generic drugs. Made in India, made in China. It's also about Ranbaxy, and it is about the kind of work the kind of difficulties that Dinesh had to endure. So this is something you have to read. Then this is a book, and there's a little bit of story behind it. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep you all away from the speakers for a while. I purchased this book 3 weeks ago, and then my room got painted. So I've lost it somewhere in my room because the books are all over the place. So I haven't been able to really go through it. But this is another book, which is, this is by Dinesh and Prashant. This is another book you should be reading about, the pills that we pop. We have Ganadhish, who was invited by Prashant and Dinesh because he blogs on the subject of drug regulation. And his association with the pharmaceutical companies is more proximate. So he's somebody who can bring us up to date about what's happening in the sector and what can possibly be done, how have things changed since the last 10, 15 years or so. And we'll begin with you, Ganadhish, to just lay out for everyone what the main issues in drug regulation are. Then we can go back a little bit to the history of drug regulation, or at least from the time that you got involved with it, Dinesh and Prashant.
Good evening, everybody. So, what is wrong? I have to find a word. What is right about drug regulations? Because the drug regulations of India were established in 1940, even before I was born, and now still we are having same act. 1940 Act, with some minor improvements here and there. Then the drug rules were formed in 1945. They have gone little bit of more changes, but again, whatever changes we have done, they are not in line with the scientific developments which have happened. Because see, in those days, those laws and rules were probably adequate, because that was the understanding. But as our understanding goes, improves, then we need to constantly keep them updated, and that has not happened. Even many of the drugs what we studied during our pharmacy are no longer getting used, but then these regulations, same are getting continued. To give some, very broad level, what are wrong in our regulation are, first is the organization structure itself. Our DCGI, which is supposed to control the drug quality of drug across India, is level below under secretary to in the ministry. Okay, so what control he will have, what independence it will have, and now the states have their own structures and state FDAs, so which they don't directly report. They come under the state health ministry. So they don't directly come under control of DCGI. So many times, even if DCGI passes some regulations, certain directives, etc., not necessarily they are adopted in all states equally. Okay, the way our drugs are getting approved in India, they completely lack scientific evaluation. Okay, so DCGI approves the new drugs. New drugs means the drugs which are less than 4-year-old in the Indian market, they are considered as new. This is also completely illogical way of thinking. But anyway, that is the way. And so DCGI approves the new drugs and vaccines and some biologicals, etc., and blood products. Those so selective things are under DCGI. And after 4 years, all the drugs are approved in state FDAs. Now state FDAs, I did some analysis of what kind of documents which are required by different states. First of all, there is a wide variability. There is no harmonization. Second thing, majority of these documents are just administrative data. Nothing, no scientific evaluation whatsoever. So I was just talking to Dr. Bandekar before. What's the generic products? Many times there is a confusion between branded and generic. In India, 99% of the products which are there, they are all generic, basically. They might be branded by different companies, but they are generic. Now what is generic? Just to give some bit of idea. So generic is the drug which should be pharmaceutically equivalent to the patented drug which is off patent. After that, a drug what you are making exactly which is matching that drug in terms of chemistry as well as in terms of bioavailability. Okay, that such product can be considered as the generic. Now in India, we still don't do bioavailability evaluation. So there is a guideline now, at least for category 1 and 4, I think, no, not 1, 2 and 4, they have made it mandatory, but still it is not being applied uniformly in the country. Second thing is, drug is fine, purity is one part, but the drug comes with a lot of impurities, and these impurities can come during the synthesis of the drug or can generate during the storage of the drug. So there is no control unless it is a part of pharmacopoeia requirement. No, there is no control, and nobody when the application is submitted, there is no control whether they are really, these impurities are proved to be safe to that level, etc. This kind of evaluation is not done. So these are the main areas of this. Second thing is, if you see the compliance part, it is state by state, it is quite different. Goa will follow some other, maybe stringent, and some other state in it is completely, there is no control, especially with respect to the good manufacturing practices. We have seen many companies, almost like 30% of the companies which were inspected by CDSCO were found to be completely non-compliant and had to be stopped. And how many they have inspected? They have inspected about 400. In total, there are 10,000 manufacturing units in India. So if CDSCO has to inspect all of them, they will take 30 years plus at that rate. So how is it possible? Every state has to ensure same standard, and that's not happening. And these are some of the main problems in the current drug regulations as well as their implementation.
Prashant, Dinesh, either of you could pick it up from here. I mean, I think what Ganadhish is basically saying is that the organizational structure of our drug regulation system is very, very weak, not just in terms of the structure itself, but manpower to quality control to just about everything.
Just to add also, Mr. Kamat has headed the quality control department in several big pharmaceutical companies like Dr. Reddy's and Lupin. So this is someone who knows the system and has worked with it closely. Do you want to start?
I'll start.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you for coming. I know this is a very dry topic. And as you can see, Mr. Kamat is very erudite, given his experience working in the industry in very senior levels. He understands how the system works. What I want to do is actually bring it down to your experience and my experience. So just bear with me for a few minutes because I'm just going to talk about why does it matter to us, right? You're here, you've taken time out of your evening to come and, participate in this discussion. And I want to kind of understand, what your experience is. Let's go back 4 years, peak of COVID, right? Do you remember a drug called favipiravir, Fabiflu? Do you remember how crazy it was that people were willing to pay a lot of money for that? I read in the newspaper that the company that actually sold Fabiflu made 720 crores in that period of time during COVID. Just imagine how much money that is. 720 crore rupees from people like you and me and my parents. My family lives here. My parents are elderly, my dad's elderly, right? There's a lot of misinformation, right? Do you know this drug Fabiflu? It does nothing for COVID, nothing. It's an antiretroviral, but there is no clinical data that actually tells you this drug works for, against this. Then there was another drug. It was called ivermectin. I don't know how many people know about ivermectin, right? Ivermectin is actually used in veterinary medicine. There is no clinical data to justify usage of ivermectin in human subjects, people like you and me. Do you know how crazy it was that these drugs were prescribed by well-meaning doctors in our country, right? Doctors who actually went to med school, they got trained in medicine and they prescribed this to their patients in good faith. I'm not even talking about coronal, okay? That's a whole different story. We'll talk about coronal at that point in time, right? Because the level of scam of coronal is completely different. The reason I think it's important for you to understand why we're here, why you took time, an hour, 2 hours from your time to come talk about this here, is because when you need to think about medicine, right? At that point in time, you're not equipped to do that. Because you see, when you're sick, you don't think about, whether you're going to the right doctor, whether you're going to the right hospital, whether the right medicine is being prescribed to you, right? How many times has it happened that you felt sick and you went to a doctor or to the hospital, and at that time you start thinking, is this the right medicine for me? Or is the right, care that I'm buying for my parents, my wife, my children? How many times have you thought about that? Right? The reason I think this is important is this is something that affects all of us, right? At some point in time, Pushkar was talking about we pop pills. Yes, we do pop pills. Let's be honest about it, right? We do that. As we get older, we take medicine. I'm pre-diabetic. I take metformin, right? My point is that the time to talk about these things is now, when you don't need medical help. Because at the time that you need medical help, it's too late. It's too late. The last thing I'm going to point out, and I'm going to stop because, the journey that we're going to talk about, Prashant and I are both partners. We've been at this for 10 years now. There was an incident during the peak of COVID. I don't know if you remember this at all, but it was reported as was a 2-page story in the Mint. the newspaper called the Mint, right? There was a drug called remdesivir, right? Remdesivir was prescribed, for treatment of SARS-CoV-2. But if the case was really, really bad, in the sense that you were already hospitalized at that point in time and you were on a ventilator, they wouldn't give you capsules. They would actually give you an injectable, right? There were 4 or 5 deaths in the state of Uttar Pradesh when patients who were in the hospital were administered injectable remdesivir, right? And their condition got worse and the patients died. The state of, was it state of Bihar or UP? I'm sorry, I forget right now, but one of those 2 states. They launched an investigation to find out. Like anything else in our country, investigations don't really go anywhere, but nonetheless, what they found out was that the injectable actually had contamination in it from bacteria. And that was what was the cause of the pains and the shivering that patients got, and eventually succumb. I mean, you're already in a bad condition, you're on a ventilator. Imagine being given a contaminated injection. What is going to happen to you? The point I'm trying to make to you is that what Mr. Kamat was talking about, right? As an industry expert, he understands the guts of what is really happening within the industry. And he told you why these things happen. Why is it that our regulators and the regulations don't function? And when they don't function, it affects all of us, right? It affects you, it affects me, it affects my family, it affects your family. And we don't pay attention to these things. And the whole point of Prashant and I writing this book, in doing the research, was at least to have a conversation. Last anecdote, and after that I'll shut up, because I think Prashant should talk. Tell me, how many times has it happened to you where, if doctors prescribe some medicine for you, the first time you take the medicine, you may feel well. After a week, you don't feel well. You don't feel the medicine's working. And you go back to the doctor, and there's a doctor sitting in the audience here, and you complain to the doctor, कि डॉक्टर साहब मेरी दवाई काम नहीं कर रही है, right? I'm not feeling better आपकी दवाई देने के बाद. How many times the doctor says कि आपकी दवाई बदल देते हैं? How many times has this happened to you? Right? How many times have you asked the doctor, डॉक्टर साहब दवाई क्यों बदल रहे हो? पहली बारी आपने क्या सोच के दवाई मुझे दी थी, और अब क्या सोच के आप दवाई बदल रहे हो, right? What is it that is different in the new medicine that you're prescribing to me? What was wrong with the older medicine that you've given to me? We don't ask, right? And the doctors are busy as well. They don't actually, worry about explaining this kind of stuff to you. These are important things, right? The reason why the doctor gave you the medicine the first time was based upon the medical school the doctor went to and the practice that they actually indulge in their clinic, right? The number of patients they see and the experience that they've garnered over a number of years. How often do you really ask the doctor कि भाई आप दवाई बदल क्यों रहे हो? पहले वाली दवाई में खराबी क्या थी? अभी वाली दवाई में खराबी क्यों बदल रहे हो? Right? And most doctors don't even think about this, right? I'm just giving you examples of this in your own life, right? Because this stuff is very dry. What Mr. Kamat is talking about, right? And he and I can debate all of these things. This is about regulation, regulator, the DCGI, where does he fit in the pecking order of the Ministry of Health, right? What does the minister do and what does the secretary do? This is all, for people, like for lay people, it's an academic exercise, right? Why the hell do I have to care about this? What I'm telling you is you have to care about this because at the end, when you don't feel well and you go to the doctor and say, पिछली last हफ्ते आपने जो दवाई दी थी उसका काम नहीं कर रही है, does it make the doctor think why is the medicine not working? Most of my experience in the last 15 years has been in the United States, right? I'm very, very familiar with the way medicine is practiced in the United States and the UK, and I also know about how medicine is practiced here. What I want to do in this discussion is just try and at least give you a few things that you want to think about when it comes to medical care, because sooner or later we all are going to need medical care. And that's a reality, right? So I'll stop there. I think Prashant maybe want to put.
Yeah, hi, thanks Dinesh. So Pushkar, please just tell me when to stop because I'm a lawyer, I can keep talking until the... So I'll just get into a little bit of in some of the legal issues that are afflicting the system and what are hampering drug regulation in India. Like Mr. Kamat was telling us that one of the big problems in India is that in every state that you go, you're dealing with a different drug controller and a different drug regulator. And the standards appear to be varying across the country. I mean, now this is partly a result of historical accident because India's drug regulatory laws were framed prior to independence, when India was governed by a law called the Government of India Act. There were certain requirements under that law because of which we framed a complicated regulatory system wherein every state has a drug regulator and you have a central drug regulator. So as of today, plus every union territory has a regulator. So in India today, you have 37 drug regulators, one in each state, one in each union territory, plus the central regulator. And on the other hand, you have a common market for drugs. So a drug manufactured in Himachal Pradesh can be sold across the country. So it's very odd for any kind of federal country like India to split regulatory activities across 37, 38 different authorities, and then have the drugs manufactured in one state go from one state to another. And there's several problems on the ground because we have seen states like Himachal Pradesh, which accounts for the majority of pharmaceutical manufacturing in India, because there was certain tax exemptions given for the development of hilly states, because of which Himachal Pradesh became the hub of pharmaceutical manufacturing in the country. Now, the local politician in Himachal Pradesh likely has an investment in a lot of those pharmaceutical companies, and even if he doesn't have investments in pharmaceutical companies, politicians are worried about jobs, tax revenue, etc., etc. So there's a fundamental conflict in, should I enforce the law strong enough wherein this guy is just going to run to Uttarakhand and set up a unit there? Or should I worry about the growth of my people, ensure enough employment and revenues? So this is a fundamental level of conflict at the local level that is distorting incentives for regulators and pharmaceutical companies, and there is no will to enforce the law in many states. The other problem is obviously state governments. For them, priorities like drug regulation are just not even in the top 20 of their list. They are looking at more bread butter issues. So drug regulators are extremely underfunded in states. They don't have resources. They don't have inspectors sufficient enough to do their job well. So this is an issue that has been at the center of the conversation for almost since I think 1954, when it was first flagged in a government report. And till date, we haven't been able to fix it because there are a very powerful lobbies of pharmaceutical companies who do not want this equation to change. They have very good equations with their local politician. They do not want that to be disrupted and having to deal with a new set of bureaucrats and politicians in New Delhi. So that's the big constitutional law issue of federalism on what is distorting drug regulation in India. A second more fundamental problem is there is no transparency in how India's drug regulators work. Like if you look at foreign drug regulators, just go onto the website of the USFD, the United States regulator, or the European regulators, you have so much information on how the regulator has taken decisions to approve drugs, approve manufacturing facilities, how they're conducting inspections. And the beauty about transparency, as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant, is that once a bureaucrat knows that his reports are going to be made publicly available, he also knows that if something goes wrong tomorrow with a particular plant or a particular drug, he's going to be held accountable. So that's a great incentive for a bureaucrat to work more efficiently. In India, everything is behind closed doors. I mean, forget behind closed doors. What we have discovered during the course of our research is that records very frequently just disappear from government offices. And these are answers not just given to us. There was a parliamentary standing committee which summoned records from the DCGI's office on how certain critical drugs not approved anywhere else in the world were being approved in India. And they had the audacity to tell the parliamentary standing committee, sorry, we lost the records in question. when the Parliamentary Standing Committee ordered for an inquiry to be conducted into how certain drugs were approved, they conducted the inquiry, the government, and then they lost the report. Like we had asked for it under the RTI Act. They said it's not there. We fought the case till the Information Commission. We went to the Delhi High Court, and they have on record, on affidavit, said that, yeah, we've lost the records. Sorry. So transparency is something that could change. If there was greater transparency, a lot of these problems would resolve. And the third problem is there's a lack of a culture in drug regulation in India. I mean, this is a problem across government of allowing for public participation in key decision-making processes. For example, in the United States and Brazil, when a drug application is being approved, a new drug application, you have avenues wherein they have public hearings. There are avenues for experts from the medical community to participate. Common citizens can participate. And that's how you create a culture of trust in the regulator and its actions. In India, again, there is absolutely no avenue for a lot of us to.
Yeah, I'd like to correct you. There is a process in place, but it is not being followed. So they publish the gazette that this is what we are bringing. Ask for suggestions. You give them suggestions. Where the suggestion goes, nobody knows.
Yeah, but the gazette is only for key regulatory changes where the rules are being changed.
Yeah.
When drugs are being approved, there's absolutely no process. And the right to participation is one of the core rights of being a democratic citizen, right? Like in environmental law, for example, when an environmental impact assessment is conducted, the law mandates a public hearing. Why don't we have something like that for drug regulation? I mean, this may be a complex issue. Not everybody will go for it, but there will be doctors with expertise who could possibly contribute to the entire process. The third problem is drug regulation is 50% law, 50% regulatory science. I mean, you need to have people with the skills to understand pharmacology, chemistry, biology. I mean, medicine is getting even more complicated these days, so you need a whole range of experts within government and who are able to formulate scientific standards. And what we realized during the course of our work is that the government of India is just not capable of doing this, or they're not showing a willingness to execute this. And this has direct consequences for a lot of us, because unless the scientific standard is prescribed in the law, the pharmaceutical industry is not going to meet that standard. And not all these scientific questions are very complex. I'll give you a simple example on standards regarding storage and distribution. Okay, let's presume the pharmaceutical industry does a fantastic job of formulating a drug, making sure it's stable, it's efficacious, and shipping it out to the market. If that drug sample is not stored properly during transit, there is no point of manufacturing that drug, because it will degrade and it will not function properly when a patient consumes it. And we have found judgments from 1976 where the Supreme Court has warned the government. In one of the cases that came up before, it realized that the law did not prescribe any standards for storage and distribution. Till date, the government has not fixed this. Their proposal will come up, it will go into circulation in the ministry, and then it will get lost in the files of the bureaucracy. And I mean, this is a simple standard. There are tougher, more complex standards. For example, how do you ensure that a drug manufactured by company A is the same as the drug manufactured by company B? Let's take paracetamol, right? There are about 10 companies manufacturing it. How exactly is the regulator ensuring that all 10 of them have the same standard? Because it's not enough for the companies, for the drugs to have the same active ingredient. The tougher part of formulation of generics is that the drug has to dissolve properly in the human body at the right time, in the right quantities. If it doesn't dissolve properly, then it's not going to have the same effect. Now, in other countries, they've introduced tests called bioequivalence, bioavailability studies, which Mr. Kamat referred to, where in order to get a license to manufacture a drug, you have to show on human volunteers, about 30-40 volunteers, that the generic drug is dissolving at the same rate or equivalent rate as the main drug which has gone through clinical trials, etc., etc. It's a very basic test. It's a little bit more expensive, but it's required to ensure that the manufacturer has the capability to formulate the drugs. In India, we made this mandatory in 2017 with large exceptions. And even that, we don't know how different state drug controllers are interpreting those regulations, because everything is happening in opacity. Which is why last year, when the National Medical Commission came out with a regulation, I'm sure some of you must have followed it in the news, where they came out with what sounded like a sensible regulation. They said from here on onwards, doctors have to prescribe drugs only by the generic name. So for example, you have to write paracetamol, you cannot write Crocin or Dolo, because then the pharmacist will end up giving you only those brands when there may be cheaper brands available. And this is quite a standard requirement in other countries. Like in the United States, it's been there for ages. There was an uproar from the medical community. Now, the demagogues in the government have said, oh, all these doctors are corrupt, they want to earn money from pharmaceutical companies. But doctors have a more rational reason to oppose this. That is because doctors have seen during the course of their medical practice that patients are not happy with all qualities or all brands of medicine available in the market, because doctors have a constant feedback loop, and they know when some certain drugs are not working, patients are coming and complaining to them, because of which they prescribe certain specific brands to their patient, which they've developed a confidence in based on patient feedback. So when the medical community of the world's largest, like India likes to call itself the pharmacy of the world, when doctors in the pharmacy of the world are protesting against such a sensible regulation, that's a reflection of their confidence in the quality of drugs being sold in the market. And this brings me to the last issue of what is, like, I'm sure this paradox must have arisen in some of your minds, that is, how is India considered to be the pharmacy of the world? How are we able to export to highly regulated markets in the United States and Europe, and we still have doctors who are not confident in the quality of medicine being sold in India? And the answer to that is very simple. The plants which are exporting to the United States and Europe are not manufacturing for the domestic market. A lot of pharmaceutical companies have different plants for India, Africa, Central Asia, which are the lesser regulated markets, and for highly regulated markets in the United States and Europe. So these guys may have the capacity, they have the skills to manufacture good drugs, but because of regulatory issues, they know they can get by without following all the standards. They will try and escape and cut corners and make money, and you can't even blame them, because if you're competing with some nefarious character in the badlands of Himachal Pradesh somewhere, you want to compete with his price point, you don't have a choice but to cut your own corners to ensure that you can compete with this guy. And one last point, when on the issue of enforcement, when a lot of these cases, so the government has a system wherein drug inspectors in every state go draw samples randomly from the market. They test them in government labs, and the samples that fail quality testing, those pharmaceutical companies are supposed to be prosecuted under the law for manufacturing substandard drugs. Now what we realize is these cases are prosecuted in criminal courts. So in a state like Maharashtra, these cases can drag out for anywhere between 9 years to 25 years. And even in the few cases where there is a successful prosecution, like where the drug inspector has managed to prove his case and gets a guilty verdict in his, against the pharmaceutical company, the practice in magistrates' courts across the country, what we noticed is that the sentencing is exceptionally lenient. So it is generally simple imprisonment till the rising of the court, which means that you can go home at the end of the day the moment the judge rises to go home, and a fine of 10,000 to 20,000 rupees. And this has been diluted last year through this law called the Jan Vishwas Act, which the Modi government claimed is meant to decriminalize minor offenses. Anyway, that's a whole different story. Now, I mean, all these issues, the toughest part about, discussing these issues over the last 2 years, as we have come to realize, is the fact that you are going to be labeled anti-national for questioning not even the government, for questioning the Indian pharmaceutical industry. And the space to discuss these issues without, having, and there are people in the government who have, come after Dinesh and, called them anti-national, and we got legal notices and all of that. When we can't even discuss something as basic as drug regulation, which is affecting all our lives, because we are worried about being called anti-national, or because, government is trying to intimidate us in different ways, it's time to start worrying. I mean, if we can't even talk about this, forget talking about the more complicated political issues, then how are things ever going to change in this country? I'll end on that depressing note.
Prashant, that was definitely a lawyer talking. So, but I'll just couple of points, very broad points, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. One is clearly this is a case where you need decolonization of these laws. I mean, you can have any government, academics, anybody talk about, doing away with colonial era laws, and this is certainly one where, things need to change. The other thing, interesting point was that, we talked about, the federal government, the central government having an agency and the state government. Now, this is again a case where one nation, one agency has to come in. No, I mean, you find that in the education sector, and the same thing. You have the University Grants Commission and you have the state bodies, etc. I mean, okay, the University Grants Commission is able to ensure certain things, other things, no. But the case of Himachal Pradesh is again very interesting, because that reminded me of things that were written about India's private universities not too long ago, which is that every politician has a university or a college somewhere in the country, right? So it seems that would be the case with Himachal Pradesh, where politicians and are heavily involved in the pharmaceutical sector. Questions, and then we can just go a bit back and forth.
So before the questions, I'd like to add to few things. One is our way of controlling quality by sampling itself is flawed. Yeah. Because, there I just made some rough estimate, and in a month, roughly we are putting around 2 lakh batches of drugs in the market. Okay, so, which is because there are so many manufacturers, 10,000 manufacturing units, etc., and manufacturing so many products. So how is it possible for taking some samples? So first thing, and one is a sample, then you do the testing, and even if it is within the specification or out of specification, there are many other aspects of it. So leaving it aside, first of all, this is very minuscule. So what we'll see is only the tip of the iceberg. The basic process of approving is the main important aspect. And the law, why that law has not updated? There was an attempt to bring new law, new act in 2022. And before this, the government asked industry to provide inputs, and other people also. So many inputs must have come to government. And when I saw the final draft bill of 2022, it was virtually the same bill with few additions of few sections like medical device, controls on medical device. There's nothing major change. So that shows that the people who are drafting this, they don't have exposure to international regulations. And they are neither upgraded themselves to learn and undo, nor government has made any effort. See, there is an agency or international conference of harmonization in the medicines. So, which work on harmonizing all the regulations, etc., across the world. India, we are number 5 in GDP, but we are not participant. We are not participant of ICH. Why not? We should be in forefront of designing the regulations rather than just following what WHO is prescribing. WHO is for the people like Africa, where they don't have their own control. We should be telling WHO, and we are simply copying from WHO.
Honestly, I've seen a lot of African countries with far better regulators than India.
Yeah.
But just to take up one point that Mr. Kamat raised on why is the ministry, putting out such bad draft laws in 2024. Like that, the law that they put out, in 2022 was almost a copy of the existing law. They didn't have any substantial changes. Now, to understand that, you need to understand how the Ministry of Health functions. So the Drug Controller General, who is the national drug regulator, he actually doesn't have any powers to make laws or regulations. Almost zero powers. He reports to an undersecretary or joint secretary level officer, which is in the government pecking order, it is very, very low. The main policy making function of the Ministry of Health is discharged by what is called the Drug Regulation Section. This is an obscure section in the Department of Health which you will not have heard of unless you are working on this issue. And that is headed by a joint secretary who is drawn from the All India services. Like the last joint secretary who was responsible for drug regulation, the drug regulation section, in charge of making policy for this cutting edge industry which impacts all our lives, he was from the Indian Revenue Service. He had an MBBS degree, but I don't think he ever practiced medicine. He joined the All India services, got selected to the IRS, and they appointed this guy as a joint secretary. Now this gentleman is going to be there for 3 years, and then he's going to go and become some GST inspector or something like that. Now, how do you expect sophisticated policy to be drafted in this framework? Because anytime a key technical issue or policy issue comes across the joint secretary's desk, he doesn't know what to do with it. He kicks it down the chain. It comes back to the DCGI. The DCGI now has 1,000 things on his head. So it gets kicked down even further. It will go to the lowest level officer who will draft something and send it back up.
I disagree with this because DCGI, if he's taken that role, he has to create an organization so that he can deliver what he's supposed to do. Okay, everybody, if he says no, what I can do, then who will do it, right? So same thing we can also say in the private pharma. Private pharma, our bonus is dependent on our performance. So same thing should happen in government. Then only the people will say, okay, if I don't have that expertise, I'll take that expertise from outside, and they can do that.
Yeah.
And we gave all the suggestions. I'm sure many of us people might have given. I personally gave suggestions. Not a single was accepted.
This seems to be a classic case where you need to have lateral entry. I mean, for the Ministry of Health, people from the sector with certain expertise who are going to be responsible, and yet this remains neglected. Questions, observations?
Good evening, sirs. I think we've made a mention of quality in the medicines that we use. I would like to understand: where does the problem lie? Does it lie in the raw material? I believe 95 or I believe about 65-70% of our API is imported from China. So is the API the problem, or is it the manufacturing facilities that are not monitored? That's the problem. Is it the storage, transportation, distribution? Is that the problem? And I'm not even getting into the fakes and adulteration part, because that's an organized industry separately. So when we talk of quality, and I as a consumer, am I to be worried that 65% of India's active pharmaceutical ingredients are imported from China, and is that a quality concern for us? Or is it that it's within the country itself that we don't follow the rules and regulations? That's the first question. I have other questions regarding generic drugs, which I don't think I should take up too much. I mean, I don't want to dominate the questionnaire, but I'll come back to that a little later.
So you want me to answer? So it is a combination of all. Okay, because the basic, as I said, since the regulations are inadequate and the way the products which are approved, they are not, drug applications are not scientifically evaluated, all kind of problems can happen. Like for example, suppose I am sourcing a API from China, it's not a problem. We can source and we can, as long as I control that vendor properly, I see his process, understand what impurities are possible to be formed in his process, and control those impurities within the acceptable level, there is no problem in taking the drug from China. But if I don't put those controls in place and I just simply buy from China and start using, those impurities will pass through to in the final drug. Same way, if I don't formulate the product to make it bioequivalent, the drug may be there. It may be, it will pass the test. But when you take the medicine, you may not get the effect. So both safety and efficacy can get affected if there are no adequate control. A third part is the manufacturing control, what you say. If the good manufacturing practices are not followed, there can be cross-contamination. Some other drug may get contaminated. You know, I'll give an example of this diethylene glycol. By the way, I've written a blog on it. You guys can check. So there was a case in India that 12 children died in Jammu because of contamination of diethylene glycol in the propylene glycol, okay? In the cough syrup. And that propylene glycol was used in cough syrup. At that time, nothing was done, okay? Later on, the cases came from WHO that Uzbekistan and Gambia, there were hundreds of children death was reported. At that time, our DCGI says, no, we have tested and everything is fine. Is this the way to do? I'll give another example. You know, in 1939, this calamity happened in US, where by mistake, at that time the chemistry was not so well known, so they used diethylene glycol to formulate the sulfanilamide syrup for children, and 100 children died. The action from the government was the Food and Drug Act came in place. So they acted it that way. After that, there has no death in that country. Okay, but we haven't taken any action on this. The similar death happened in Chile or some South American company. I'm not able to recall the name. Panama. So the drug controller was sentenced to death because they failed to put right controls in place. And what we have done, we have just said, no, nothing happened. And see, the problem in India is many deaths don't even get, the causality of the death is not, registered or reached. So, how many people are dying because of the contamination in the drug or contamination in whatever, we don't even know. This is the problem.
Ganadhish, this is all very, very depressing, okay?
No, I'm just trying to fact.
It's not just about dying, but it's also about not getting better, or your health.
I think sorry, there are a couple of questions. I'll answer later on. Go ahead.
Yeah. See. Okay. So, from what you said and my own understanding of regulation in other contexts, I would vehemently agree with you. In fact, I have all of you have said kind of feeds it. So the government of India is completely incapable, not just here, but in many other sectors as well. For instance, on road safety, we have the world's highest accident rate.
Yes,
if measured correctly, 10 times the US average. Similarly, on morbidity, there is no country in the world with our average level of income with such a huge disease burden. I'd also tell you something else. If you take India's HDI and take the components and look at those components where the government could have done something, like literacy, morbidity, MMR and so on, we do much worse than the world income category through a regression category. In those where the private sector could have done something, the family could have done something, we do average or slightly better. So there is a lot of compensation which families, doctors and systems do for being subject to this kind of stuff. Now, I would just finish. I'd like to draw your attention to the Lenten Commission report,
Yes.
okay, which kind of brought out that the drug procurement in the country was literally murdering people.
Correct.
There's nothing short of that. So since then, the first question is, apparently from what you say, there has been no great improvement. So I am quite like you. I don't think the government of India can change unless there is a fundamental change in the bureaucracy. Okay? And that change is not just about people being in the posts and being professional and so on, which are all known, but it is the very root of the ethos of the bureaucracy, and how you change that we need to debate. But the basic point is, when a bureaucrat thinks, he thinks in terms of turf, not in terms of public value, not in terms of social value, and from what you are saying, not even in terms of lives. So my contention is, governance in India is most unethical. Okay? And it's not just in this sector. Wherever lives are at stake, lives are being slaughtered for a larger purpose. Okay? Perhaps that purpose is innate. In this case, at least the purpose seems to have been good. Okay, good in the long run sense of killing people over this 20, 30 year, 40 year period in order to create some world class drug companies. Okay? So I just laid this ground to pose the second question. The second question is like this. If indeed the government of India is going to be incapable and nothing can come out of it, you can kind of fight them for ages and file PILs, but nothing is going to happen. For one very important reason that he said, the power hierarchy is actually topsy-turvy, which is an added factor here. Okay? Then what do we do? My sense is that, let's see, when regulation, how does the world function when there is no regulation? Right. By reputation, of course. Okay? So let the reputation be allowed to be exercised. In other words, what I'm saying is, give the space for brands. Let's educate people that they must go for brands. Yes, it will mean a slightly higher cost. Okay? Let the front-facing fellows, that means all the drug manufacturers who face doctors and patients and chemists directly, dispensers directly, let them be large. Because you can't have a reputation unless you're large. Okay? If you have a fellow who's manufacturing something by using river water in the middle of Himachal, he will do anything possible because he can hide.
But the information asymmetry will always be
What I'm
against
saying
that. A
is,
Mankind Pharma will hire
wait,
Amitabh Bachchan to build its
I am
brand
not-
and manufacture crap still.
One
right?
second. What I'm saying is that Indian companies could then begin to give the same drug quality that they give to the export industries. The world is different.
No, so the export.
Let me complete.
But how are you going to ensure information symmetry?
No, what?
How is the consumer going to
Transparency is a good
know?
idea.
Yeah, but if we can get transparency to
one
work,
second.
then the entire system
No,
will
it doesn't.
change.
It doesn't. See, the point is, with a lot of transparency, with every report in a different sector being out there in the public, nothing has changed. Because the government is incapable fundamentally. There cannot be enforcement in India. There can only be standards, and you can eat the standards. Our solid waste treatment standards, I know from infrastructure, are Californian. But the actual implementation is gutter. Okay? So Bangalore has the world's highest standards. But because they are so high, that's another problem. So you could easily have great standards. In the drugs you don't have. So there are different kinds of regulatory failures in India. Like Anna Karenina, every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So what I'm trying to say is, because here lives are at stake. My sense is that you guys who are influential should actually give a lot of support to the idea of branded drugs. While branded drugs are, the good regulators have been able to go beyond branded drugs.
So
in
what
India, it can
contributes
result in
to a
arrest.
good branded drug? Tell me that. How do you determine what is a good branded drug?
No, I don't know. I mean, I'm just saying that.
I'm telling you, no.
So
Amitabh
let-
Bachchan
let-
advertises, people think, oh, acha
Not
brand
people.
hai.
What about doctors?
Doctors also will buy it.
So,
No.
how? I'll give you one
His
example.
reputation is allowed to work.
I'll give you
Because
one
of Amitabh Bachchan, not because of the drug quality, right? That's the challenge, because so
So-
many parameters of drug quality are invisible to the common eye and are very difficult to measure outside a highly specialized lab. That's the challenge.
I'll give you an example of branded drugs which I experienced 2 weeks ago.
It's working.
Okay, I have a back problem. So my doctor prescribed to me Zerodol, TH 4 milligram. So I went to the chemist, 237 rupees for 10 tablets. Casually I asked the chemist, I said, is there a generic version of this? He says, yes, but I don't keep it. I said, where can I get it? He says, you'll have to find out where it is. I said, luck would have it, downtown Panjim, 18th June Road. Across the chemist that I was talking to was a chemist shop called Jeevan something, or it was a central government initiative is what that guy told me. Jan Aushadhi, yeah, that's right. So I went into that outlet and I said, look, I want something equivalent to Zerodol. So he gave me a medicine. I very closely checked the salt of both these, the original Zerodol and the one that he was giving me. The one he was giving me was for 99 rupees. 237 versus 99. Now I had a choice. I could go to the branded guy. I have the means, I have the money. But I said, let me try this 99 rupee wala thing. It worked brilliantly. So, I mean, there may be another experience which says, the generic doesn't work, but it's amazing how we are confronted in making these choices, and we don't know whether we are doing the right thing or the wrong thing.
Correct. So we have two doctors in the audience, right? We have a doctor here, and I have a physician there as well. Let's hear, what their experience is, because you see, I mean, look, these are all good anecdotes. I'm not going to discount, your personal experience, right? These are good anecdotes, but let's just hear the doctors, and then we'll come back and talk about this a little
But
bit.
just to clarify one point, whether it is branded or generic, all are generic in India. Okay, as I said initially.
That
Okay,
distinction.
now the quality doesn't depend only because it has a brand name doesn't mean the quality is better. Okay, quality is only good if it has been controlled adequately by the company. Okay, because the regulators are not doing. Some companies are very responsible. They are ensuring all the requirements, even if they are not required by law. They follow all those regulations, so their quality will be good. And it could be generic, it could be branded. But what we want in the country is, if I take any medicine, it should be of good quality.
Hello. I think let us get a story from the horse's mouth, because my name is Dr. Bandodkar, not Bandekar. I am a practicing physician for the last 38 years, and I admit my serious patients in various corporate hospitals. So there is a lot of dichotomy in what I listened, and then it gave in my gut some sort of a very scary, unstable, insecure feeling anyway. And what I want to say here is this, that immediate impression, my inner conscience said, what you speak, guys, is not really, it cannot be really true. There is a far other side to it. And the other side is like this. When you actually treat people and actually are on the war front, treating very sick people, dying people, ICUs, charging, obviously compensating heavy bills, that's fine. Intensive care, antibiotics, life-saving IV medications, potassiums, and what have you. And then it is taken for granted that the standards of this medicine are extraordinarily good. I hope you get what I want to say. We are not talking about formulations which are just like what he said as a painkiller. And then the feeling is that it works fine. And how it works fine is that we ensure that only, as he said, the branded products, the good quality products, are only chosen by the hospital committee for all that. And there are results to speak. The patient gets better, goes home, life is saved, goes home. That's one part of the story. The second is, when there is these market forces of various manufacturing this, obviously like any other consumer products which we consume in our day-to-day life for existence, for the sake of the health and for the sake of very qualified doctors like us, we have choices to make. And obviously the choices are supported by very ethically high standard pharmaceutical manufacturers, which will obviously give us a very good standard anti-cancer molecule, monoclonal antibodies, or an antibiotic, or on, as I said, life-saving heart molecules, what have you. And that is how the equation strikes and it goes on. And the inside feeling is good, that they are in our support, it works well, and we actually save the patients and help the families. This is one part. The second question which came to my mind was that, like for example, Mr. Kamat, who has been executing as a quality assurance for the full country of a very reputed company, I believe that just because you are out of the company, probably you can take this stand. 1 minute. What I want to say is that if there were actually in-company people here sitting who are handing quality assurance manufactured inside India, even for exporting in America or Europe, I think the tone would have been different, or you would not have been taking the stand like that. Meaning thereby, any quality assurance gentleman who sits at the helm of the affairs, responsible for signing those so-called strategic vital documents, is not supposed to get into the ethicality, is supposed to get the company papers and orders right. So I personally feel just like we hire chartered accountants and financial advisors for extraordinary big corporate houses, his job is not to look on the ethicality but to give us ways.
Can I
These are the conflicts in my mind.
just one
Okay,
can I just one, you've said a lot of things. I want to respond to the last point because, look, practicing medicine is not cut and dry, right? When you practice medicine, you use your judgment based on the person's physiology, the disease condition. I'm not going to question your judgment when it comes to practicing medicine, but let me answer the question that you asked later on, right? I'll tell you my story, and I'll say this in like a very few words because there's more to it. If you're interested, I'll tell you more. I was employed by a very large company in India. I left a US position, came to work here in this country. I found out the company was essentially making chalk powder drugs. I told it to my management. It went up to the board. They didn't do anything. I was employed at that point in time as an employee. My responsibility was to my company first. I went and told my manager, the president of the company, to the board of directors. They didn't do anything. I resigned from my position. I reported this to the US FDA because I don't have the confidence in the Indian regulator. I fought this for 8 years. After 8 years, the company pled to 7 counts of criminal felony and paid $500 million in fines. So please don't question the ethics of Mr. Kamat. I know what we do.
This is not personal. What I want
No,
to say
so
that
what I wanted
your
to...
story is completely anecdotal.
Okay.
Sir, what I want to say is that as a doctor, we also have certain strategic...
Okay, may I say something please? 1 minute.
Your story is completely anecdotal.
No.
I think we can continue this later. There is a question from the
I have a question, or maybe my question will come a bit later, but first a statement.
Okay.
Ganadhish, please, 1 minute. I am a community pharmacist. I'm a B.Pharm graduate from 1984. I worked in the industry, and now for the last 10 years, I'm a community pharmacist. Now, the community pharmacist is the last line, the last mile, as they call it. And you have a direct contact with the patient, like the doctor has, but you also get a thing from the patient. When Prashant spoke about a doomsday scenario, I fully agree with you. We are in a very, very, very bad shape. I see this every day in my pharmacy. I get that feeling in my stomach that, that something is seriously wrong. And with due respect, forget about the government. All of us, the pharmaceutical profession is equally responsible. The medical profession and everybody, the courts, please, they're equally responsible for this mess. So that this place is to ask questions. I have 2 particular issues that I call bad words in the pharmaceutical industry that is going on. One is called as FDC. There is a fixed dose combination. And the second one is contract manufacturing. These are the 2 causes of the biggest problems that are happening now. How do we solve this problem? Could you help us out?
You want me? I think I will be able to. See, he is my friend. He doesn't ask me to help. Okay.
What? I put this in the group.
Yeah, okay. So, see, contract manufacturing, there is no problem because in US, if you see most branded drug manufacturers, they get their drugs manufactured from contract manufacturers. So there is nothing bad about contract manufacturing. How it is controlled, that is what is important. So one is, there should be internal controls. The manufacturer, if the company is good, then they will put their internal controls to make sure that wherever they are making the drug, it's of the right quality. That is one part. Second part was the fixed dose combination, and this is where the application approval, what I talked about, it comes. When somebody applies for a fixed dose combination, the drug regulator has to see what is the scientific rationale for it. Has there been clinical data generated for that FTC? Is it safe? And based on that only, that approval has to be granted. And because the regulations are lax, the certain states, they approve this fixed dose combination in spite of fact that the DCGI has put a ban on many of the FDCs. So this is the problem. Yeah.
I like to add
Just-
one more thing. The contract manufacturer, as a pharmacist, I find one new company coming into the market every day. one new company. Every time we get a doctor's prescription, it's a different company which I've never heard of before. I'm creating a new, system for that. And I came to find out from one medical rep who came to me, there is one company, I will not mention you its name. It has got 18 manufacturing locations in the state of Uttarakhand. Sure. One company.
It's possible. So just to respond to your question about what individuals can do. See, individuals based on their ethics and based on the company policies also, they may do well, but that is not controlling 10,000 manufacturers. See, there will be some 10, 20 companies in India who are following all these regulations, which are not, meeting the global standards. Especially the companies where I work, we followed the global standards for all market, irrespective. But that is not enough. Every manufacturer has to manufacture, because we don't know, when you write prescription, you don't know which manufacturer's drug will be chosen, right? So every manufacturer has to follow those, and how that can be done only by the regulation. So unless they have fear, everybody will not comply.
See, if I can just also, the other point to raise to answer your question is that companies also have a reputational issue to deal with, right? If you manufacture a substandard product that ends up killing people, or doctors can figure out, for example, like for diabetes or hypertension, patients can easily figure out whether the medication is working or not because of diagnostics in the house. So there is an incentive even for quality assurance departments to perform as required. But I guess it differs across different across different types of therapeutic drugs. The ones where they know they can get caught, perhaps there's a greater incentive. For the others, there may not be such a great incentive. So regarding the FDC question, just to give the audience a little bit of background, it's an extremely boring issue, but it is at the heart of the problem of drug regulation problem in India. So fixed dose combination is basically, you add about 2-3 different types of drugs into one pill and give it to the patient. So for a lot of diseases like, for example, tuberculosis, where a patient has to take about 4 or 5 different drugs. If you give them 5 drugs, patient compliance is generally bad. You combine it into one pill, the compliance generally improves. The patient will always remember to take one drug instead of taking 5 drugs. The problem in India is in the 60s and 70s, because of a drug price control law, where the government was regulating prices of some drugs and not controlling the price of other drugs. What ended up happening is the pharma industry decided, okay, I'm going to add a drug which is under price control with 2 other drugs that are not under price control, and hence I'm out of the dragnet of the drug price control order. So they were combining drugs without any therapeutic rationale. So they would combine like an antibiotic with an anti-diarrheal drug or with a steroid. Like a doctor would never prescribe these drugs together. So this problem was first identified in 1978, where a government report was commissioned. They flagged the issue. They said, yes, that this is a problem. There were a lot of questions asked in Parliament in 1980 and 1981. So finally the central government at that point suddenly realized that, we don't even have the power to ban drugs under the law. So they amended the law in 1980 to give themselves the power to ban the drugs. Now, that provision was basically an emergency provision to weed out the existing bad players in the market. Since then, they tried fixing the law. They said that now onwards, a fixed dose combination can be approved only by the National Drug Regulator. None of you state guys can approve or give manufacturing licenses unless we have first approved it. And what has happened since then is state drug regulators have completely ignored the law written on the statute books. They keep approving these FDCs, and the only way the central government is dealing with it is every 5 or 6 years they will announce a ban order of some 500 FDCs.
But then after that somebody will file in High Court, and then
it's litigated all the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
But we have been telling the government that you need to fix this problem. One way to do it is to just prosecute the companies which are manufacturing these FDCs without central approval, because it is an offense under the law. That one action they are not taking. We told them, at least change the regulations to ensure transparency, let's see which state drug regulators are approving this. Make a rule in the Drugs and Cosmetics Act where you're forcing state drug regulators to put out their approval files and who are the officers approving this. And even that has not happened. So the problem is far from being solved, and this is an issue identified in 1978, before I was born.
Dinesh?
I just wanted to address a couple of things that came up. There's another physician in the house, so we'll probably have to ask her to opine as well. But you've talked about markets and allowing, brands to do what they want to do, right? I will give you examples of where the Competition Commission of India has actually, on record, tried to prosecute cartelization, rampant cartelization at the retail level, at the wholesale and retail level. And they are ineffective. They're completely ineffective because we've done a study that actually shows how bad the cartelization is. So allowing people to charge extra money is no guarantee that you'll actually get a good quality drug. That's first thing, because we have data. We've looked at what the Competition Commission of India has actually done in this particular case of how brand medicines actually charge a certain amount of money over and above because of cartelization. And you can get the same medicine for 90 rupees, you can get the same medicine for 237 rupees. The issue is not about price, the issue is about ensuring proper quality. It doesn't matter where you buy your drug, number one. Number two, I think that the physician there, you're talking about my experience as an anecdote. Let me just, I didn't want to get into this detail, but it's important to say this, right? I'd like you to think about, what are clinical standards when you prescribe antibiotics, right? How many days do you prescribe it? What do you do in your practice in India and look at global standards? How many days is a certain medicine prescribed? And ask yourself, are they same? And if they're the same, that's great. If they're not, ask yourself, why do we prolong? If the international standard for prescription of azithromycin is for 3 to 5 days, why do we do 5 to 7 days? I'm just going to leave that as a question for you to think about, because it's important why we do 5 to 7 days, right? It's clinical medicine, but we're not following international standards. And there's a reason why, but I won't go into that detail right now. What I'm going to tell you is this, right? There are medicines where variation in dosage will not make any difference. Take headache medicine, doesn't matter, okay? Instead of getting 200 milligrams of ibuprofen, if you get 150 and you take, for 2 times a day, it's fine because your body compensates for something like that. The ADME process of elimination of that medicine works. But there are a class of drugs that are called narrow therapeutic dosage drugs, okay? If you are taking medicine for an underactive or overactive thyroid, right? If you're taking medicine that for antipsychotics, anything to do with mental health, right? If you're estrogen regulator, women's health, right? These medicines, a small variation in dosage has a disproportionately large effect in the therapeutic outcome. What I'm saying to you is that it's important to control manufacturing processes in order to have proper dosage, because those two examples I gave you are linked. Why do we prescribe azithromycin for 7 days when the global standard says 3 to 5 days? Why is it that large variety of antipsychotics in our market don't work? SSRIs don't work. People, ask yourself, right? People are taking SSRIs today. Ask, if someone's actually gotten an underactive or hyperactive thyroid, ask them how critical it is to try and get that medicine right. There are real problems, right? I'm not discounting your experience as a physician. What I'm saying to you is there is more to this. There is more to this, right? And what is not happening is we're not having this conversation. The most important thing for us to do today is to have this conversation. I am not discounting your experience as a physician. Please understand that. You have every right, because you know your patients better than anybody else in the world, right? The space for this conversation is shrinking in our country. That is the problem, right? I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I don't. Mr. Kamat and I will not agree on several things, right? But it's important for us to talk. That's all.
Where is the leverage point?
The leverage is when we actually become knowledgeable about this, right? We don't ask for accountability, sir.
Government
No, but whose government? Where does the government come from? Why is it that we are building roads today at the pace that we are building? Why are we doing that? No, because we have a minister who actually says, it's my problem, I'm going to fix this. When was the last time you had a health minister who actually did this?
Before that, there was a change. Okay? The highway development program.
I understand that,
It is
but
one organization. Then you have such, proper changes in government.
I understand. No, I understand.
But if I can just answer your question, generally leverage for change in drug regulatory laws has been the death of people, death of children. Like in the US, if you look at its entire history, for 60 years,
Sorry, Alan, I think we are going to have a long conversation after.
No, but if I can, I'd like to end that thought. In
I'm
India,
going to introduce you to Sebastian, and I'm sure you'll spend the next 3 hours.
when even after children died, the government didn't feel the need to change the law. I mean, forget change the law, they didn't even investigate the deaths properly. And that's the fundamental difference between India and a lot of other countries.
So just one question, one question. It's getting late also, but just because the last 1 hour has been so depressing. I mean, the problems that have been enunciated by the panelists is so humongous that it all seems to be, downhill only, and there is no sight of seeing any light at the end of the tunnel. My question is to Mr. Thakur. Sir, what in your experience is America and Europe doing and doing right that India should follow so that we get out of this impasse that we seem to experience?
America and Europe, they have their own problems. Okay?
They are functional democracies.
Mike.
No, so you had mentioned that, you've been in America, and I've also experienced, in a very small way, the dispensation of medicines in a state like New York, in Manhattan.
Yeah.
And I find there's a huge difference with prescription drugs
It is.
retailed in Manhattan as they are retailed here.
It is.
But that is just the tip of the iceberg. But I'm sure you have more experience as to what exactly is America doing? Why is that iconic and India is... where do you think is the solution, in other words?
Well, I think Mr. Kamat actually addressed your answer. The thing is, we have to be more, we have to hold our regulators and our administrators more accountable. It's as simple as that. I mean, America has its own problems. Today, injectables are in shortage in America, and it's for 2 years right now. We can't get, injectables available because there is a dire shortage of manufacturing facilities with proper quality injectables in the US. So they have their own problems. But one thing that works in the country is that if there's a death of that many children, they enact laws and hold the regulators accountable. We don't do that, right? That's the only question, that's the only difference. The day that we start asking these difficult questions, the next time our MP comes around asking for votes, right? You see how things change.
See, the Senate, they have Senate committees on many things, and I have seen the letters written by Senate committees to the FDA. So blunt. Whose head should roll, and that kind of questions they ask, and they hold them accountable. So no drug regulator will approve a drug which is of substandard.
So basically what you're saying is that the citizenry
Needs to be more active.
Yes.
No point blaming the government for road safety if I'm impolite on the road and if I don't signal and I cause the accident. I mean, no amount of legislation is going to correct that.
Exactly.
No,
If I'm not active enough and alert enough.
So all of us have to be knowledgeable, but we have to ask government to bring these changes. Unless government brings the regulation, we alone will not be able to do anything.
But one optimistic note to end on, about 10 years ago, there was a parliamentary standing committee, which is like some of these Senate committees in US Congress, etc. They did a detailed investigation of the drug regulator. It's available online. They did a fantastic job of bashing the drug regulator, pointing out a lot of flaws, forcing them to become a little bit more transparent, because of which we were able to write this book, because they had forced them to put out some information and they gave us a lot of leads. So it was one instance where a parliamentary institution actually did its job and held the bureaucracy accountable. Since then, we've not seen any other such instances, but on paper, technically, it was an example of democracy actually working in action.
I think, sir, if you form such an association, I will be a part of it.
Okay, last couple of questions.
I'm Dr. Sandeep Naik.
Yeah.
As a younger doctor compared to Dr. Bandodkar, The thing is that we have been trying to get our voice heard because we are the ones who are using it, and we are end users, the same way as this thing. And the difference between any other manufactured product and drugs is that people take it when I prescribe and then this thing. So I'm sort of held responsible for that, despite the fact that I have no say in any sort of manufacturing, getting it into market. And my only information actually comes from what I've studied during my MBBS days from the books, and that are written sometimes 10 years and 15 years ago. And the latest information often comes from only whatever the drug companies come around and give it. So there's a lot of disparity, and there's a problem there that we don't actually get information firsthand. We are in no way empowered to actually check out how good the drug is and all. And we have to go by a third-hand or fourth-hand information. And then finally, people come and bash us up because the thing doesn't work. So, I mean, you have to also give that sort of information, I mean,
exactly.
leverage, right?
In fact, we petitioned the government once for basic transparency. For example, if you're a doctor who doesn't have access to, say, these expensive journals or magazines where they write about how a drug is performing, at the very least, you should be able to get onto the website of the drug regulator and see what is the prescribing information, what are the adverse effects, because there are a number of studies done in India which have consistently shown that pharmaceutical companies lie in the promotional material that they give to doctors. Yeah. They do not mention adverse effects. Even the British Medical Journal, the edition in India, has been caught with its pants down because the advertisements that they were publishing in their issue would not meet the standards prescribed for their other jurisdictions. So this is a basic issue that the IMA needs to raise with the government.
Yeah, that's what is being done.
For example, even something as simple as a the package insert, for a drug, where you can read it in simple English. The US FDA makes it publicly available on what are the side effects of the drugs, what should be the dosage, what should a doctor watch out for. At least that should be publicly available. And even that's not there.
I just want, before this.
I question medical reps who come to my pharmacy. I found very often from good companies, medical reps are arts graduates and commerce graduates. How do you expect these people to advise the doctors? Please answer.
So I have, in the afternoon we were just discussing how to take it further. So one of the things what came up was IMA is a strong body. If IMA also puts pressure, we put pressure from our side, and that way probably we'll be able to shake up the government agencies. So if if IMA, president in Goa or in all India, if you guys want to understand anything more about the drug quality, etc., I am always available.
Yeah. So, we'd like to actually continue to engage.
Dinesh, the mic.
All I'm saying was, we would like to engage. I mean, this is what Prashant and I do. We go to different cities and have this conversation because we want doctors to become more aware of these kind of issues, right? I think it's important for you also to understand what are the prescription trends. I mean, you would be amazed at, like, we had a study done where we actually looked at what guides doctors prescribing what kind of medicine, right? If it's in our context, a branded generic versus Jan Aushadhi. What we found out, and maybe you will tell me that if this agrees with your experience or not, it's not just about therapeutic efficacy, it's about the patient's ability to afford something, where the patient lives, right? Do they have access to a medical store that actually carries that particular drug? Those things factor in our prescription. Nobody even talks about this, right? The sociology of what constitutes, what strata of society that the patient comes in, figures in the way that we prescribe drugs. Which medical school taught you that? Right? These are the things that we have to pay attention to, and IMA needs to take some leadership here and have these discussions, right? Because government will listen if you say something. When Baba Ramdev started abusing, allopathy, finally Dr. Lele woke up and said, look, enough, right? And you went to the Supreme Court and did something about it, right? You have to stand up for your profession. You have to stand up and sometimes push back a little bit.
And they need to educate themselves about the issues, because last year IMA came out with an angry letter after that NMC mandate on only generic names. And that letter was very badly written. Like, there are critical issues that should have been identified, but which wasn't done. So even I've realized even within the medical community, the understanding of regulation, pharmacology, etc. is quite poor. So there has to be some advocacy work within IMA to build up their positions on a lot of these issues and then deliver. And IMA used to do it 100 years ago. When the first drug law was drafted, 1931, there was an inquiry committee report, and the IMA presented very articulate views back then.
Okay, one last question, please. You had your hand up?
No, just a comment, if I may.
Okay, we'll do that after. Okay, so I get to have the last word, which is thank you everyone for your time, for engaging with a knowledgeable audience or a concerned audience. But I think I would like to add a couple of things, because that's what my position is, right? So what I really got, and it could be because that is what I wanted to hear, which is one of the things I learned teaching a course on how health improved, or health of nations improved or did not, was by reading books in history on healthcare and so on. One book I remember very well, One Nation Uninsured, by a sociologist who went on to become an advisor to Obama. And it was about the power of the American Medical Association, right? They came up with the term socialized medicine right around the 1920s. It stuck. And once it stuck, then anything, if you wanted to expand coverage, it was about those communists, those socialists. So associations and medical associations especially are powerful. They can obstruct in this case. Then you look at medical associations elsewhere. The Chilean Medical Association. The Chilean Medical Association, with Salvador Allende, who later became president, was responsible for the drafting of the 1952 laws, which basically brought in universal health care in Chile, which was modeled on the British one. And the Medical Association was a noisy, powerful actor in Chilean politics. One of their own was elected as the president and brought down by the CIA and the Chilean armed forces. You look at Brazil, 1980s, where universal health care is introduced in the 1988 constitution. It was because the doctors at the University of Sao Paulo, and I learned this over a period of time, the doctors at the University of Sao Paulo, all left-leaning. Again, there is a bias, left-wing bias here, but the thing is, it was doctors at the University of Sao Paulo who basically put so much pressure on the military government. There was an outbreak of disease 71, 72, 73, around that time, and they simply said, you have come to power on the basis of providing high rates of economic growth, and look at what's happening in our cities. So much so that over the next few years, these doctors, these left-wing doctors, many of them were inducted into the bureaucracy. And throughout the 80s, they worked to make sure that, I'm not saying that everything changed from then on for Brazil. Brazil has been a disastrous case in terms of, compared to other South American countries. But laws changed because powerful actors such as the Medical Association get involved. And the pharmaceutical companies often are going to be on the other side, right? As in the United States. So there is a case in this for drug regulation, definitely. There is a case that, doctors have to get involved. There's no other way. There's no other way. They are the ones who have that, the brand value, the prestige. We might say one thing or the other about the Indian Medical Association, but that's what we have. It has to come from the Indian Medical Association. It has to come from state medical associations. And if not, one doesn't see how possibly it could happen through the work of, activists or, others, common people who are interested. And it's not about even going into the streets. It's the voice of whose voice matters. It is the voice of experts ultimately, right? In the Brazilian health ministry, just about everyone there has worked in the health sector all their lives. The Chilean health ministry, everyone. You might have health economists, but there'll still be people with a health background. And that's true for just about every other country. So change within the bureaucracy, lateral entry, all those things, but also giving due importance to health. If you're not going to put health on your front pages, we were talking yesterday about, health makes news when people die.
Exactly.
So once again, thank you all for coming and being so patient to my final words. Thank you.